Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any public comments? Ma'am?
I have no idea. I've not seen anything. I'm just here for Ripple Creek.
Okay. And there's a packet right down there on the end if you want to, right there at the end of this table.
This thing.
Yep. All right. I don't have any comments at this time. I think without objection, we'll move number 12 up in the agenda. Ripple Creek Apartment discussion and possible motion to approve transfer to property management for a payment of $4,604 and ending the 50-year lease. Were you here on behalf of Ripple Creek?
Yes, on the Heartland Properties.
Okay.
Is the owner, or improvements owner.
So I don't know if you guys had time to look this over much, but when I did have time to look it over.
Should we approve the motion before we talk about it?
We didn't have a motion. Did we?
Oh, well, you read
Possible motion.
Possible.
Okay.
I have some concerns. I don't understand why we would hand them over for $604 ending the lease. Anybody have any thoughts?
I'd just like to know what started the conversation. Where did the conversation come from?
Sure. Ma'am, what was your name again?
Janet Smith.
Janet, do you want to jump in there?
We initiated a conversation because we're at the end of 30 years. We don't have another 20 years in us. And the property is struggling. It barely breaks even without any debt on it. It needs a lot of capital improvements. Its mechanicals are now 30 years old. And so it needs a restructure. And our proposal is that you let it go back in the market, back on your tax roll.
So the thing, that was part of it that, oh, I'm sorry, was there anything else? No. That was part of it that I kind of didn't understand. Like it was like, get it back on the tax roll. But then when I called and got some more information, and even from the documents, there's two pieces of paper like this. One of them is for the personal property taxes. So that's just what we're receiving in personal property taxes from 2016, because that's as far back as Diane had it. So if it goes back on the tax roll, the buildings are already being taxed. All that we'd be gaining is the property tax of 3 acres. And then losing the whatever would be paid on the lease payment. Now, with the lease payment, when I look at the contract, there's a certain amount that will be paid by the end, if I am understanding it right. And you want to jump in there?
I'm sorry, what was the last thing that you just said?
The lease payment. So I believe there was a balloon on that, so to speak, in my naive terminology, but I don't think they're required to pay annually. So what we see here, is that correct?
Yeah, it's there's a rental amount, and then there's rental amounts for the remainder of the term. It's confusing because it hasn't been done kind of precisely pursuant to the lease, but I mean, if both parties agree, I guess when this came up, I was looking, I'd been given the original leases for the multiple, for the properties. And I guess if we're talking about, if you want me to kind of explain sort of what's going on with this.
Nick, is the two leases, are they the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
Essentially. They're I mean, the only real difference is the property they identify, but they're treated the same way.
Okay.
So the thing is, we're 30 years into a 50-year lease, which, and so I think probably 30 years ago, there might have been some things that were anticipated, some realities or market forces that were anticipated that aren't, that might not be true now. I mean, that's not a surprise. But at the end, what's supposed to happen is that the rent and the balloon gets paid out during that 50-year period. And then at the end of the 50-year period, the property gets surrendered back to the village. So it's the village's property. So what the village would be doing is giving away its own property for $4,000, selling these buildings for $4,000 is really what's going on. If this doesn't stop the village from making a deal with the lessee and trying to figure out, well, should we, change rent payments, whatever it is, should we adjust kind of what kind of property is going to be. But legally speaking, the village is giving up a right to acquire a property that in the open market probably would be sellable at slightly higher than $4,500. Like, I don't know, 30, 40 times that, give or take, or more. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. But I mean, it's what's actually, so the village, I mean, if the village can do this, the village wants to do it, but under the lease, under either a default by the lessee or the completion of the rental term, the property comes back to the village. So it's more or less like giving your house away for $4,500 because the bank's not making any money on your mortgage is what is being proposed. I mean, for lack of a better way of putting it. So, but yes, in the meantime, I mean, it probably makes sense so that, because if there's a default, obviously, then the village has to take over and run and be the landlord, essentially, if that's the case. And my understanding is that it had been, the administrator had suggested that I had indicated that the village shouldn't be a landlord. Generally speaking, this is correct. It's probably, the village isn't really well set up to be a landlord and to run a business, because the village isn't a business. The village is a government entity. But just be aware that if you were to do this, you'd be giving up a future right to receive the property back and then sell it and put it back on the tax roll for whatever the fair market value or whatever value the village would send it for at that time. So I just want to be clear about
Can you say that last piece again?
Well, if the village is getting the property back at the end, the village then, when it becomes the owner, could sell it and do whatever it wanted with it at the end of the lease. Or if the lease is breached, by which there's any number of ways a lease can be breached. Not paying any payments that are due when they're due, failure to pay any taxes and assessments, various other compliance matters. I mean, I don't want to go into it in tremendous detail because I could go through the contract line by line and we'd be here for 2 hours. But yeah, the property doesn't belong to the lessee. They're leasing it from the village. So the village.
I would disagree. We have a deed to the improvements. I agree in 50
Sure.
years, but you still have another 20 years to survive with us.
That's correct. There's another 20 years, unless there's a breach, in which case the village can take possession.
I'm telling you right now, we're in trouble. It's not going to be good for the next 20 years.
So the question of how to deal with that aspect of it is for all of you, because legally speaking, the village can either insist upon strict enforcement of the contract, and if there's any breach, pursue any remedies it may have under if there's a breach, up to and including repossession of the property and improvements. The village can give the property away I mean, I say give, it's a nominal amount, it's basically a gift versus what the property is worth, or negotiate in some way that benefits both parties for the remaining 20 years or some time therein. So those are the options that really the village has. I mean, or I guess you can ignore the issue, which obviously is, I think, something that the lessee is suggesting would be distressing to them and probably is not productive to the village or residents, but that's really, that's not a legal opinion necessarily. That's for all of you to figure out.
So remind me, we're talking about approving the transfer from them to another entity right now, correct?
If the property is transferred to the lessee, then the village, then the leases would be terminated. The village doesn't have any control over it anymore. The village, there's no circumstance under which the village gets it back in the future. And what the village gets for this is the $4,500 or whatever is being suggested.
As compared to what the value would be. If it came back to us, we would still have the option of either hiring a management company to run it or sell it.
And we can't take it back early unless there's a breach. And again, like you said, we
We'll
don't
sell it to you. It breaks even, it has no value. Well, I say that. If you look at case law, because we're ahead of the curve on 50-year land leases, but case law is on like the right.
On what?
On 50-year land leases, how the Supreme Court's gonna look at that. But on rights of first refusal, we're entitled to the 1.2 million we put into it plus a return. In the time that we've owned it, we've taken $4,000 off of this. It's all it can handle. So you're welcome to try to manage this for 20 years and figure out how to, but you need to pay us back.
May I ask the case law that you're citing?
I looked at Supreme Court cases on rights of first refusal. Because that's the one that says that when you have a nonprofit for-profit relationship, you aren't entitled to just take away every penny we put into this deal. We've waited 30 years to try to get something out of it. We should have done it at 15, but you guys aren't going to be ready. There's nobody that stepped up to try to figure out how to bridge the gap where there's no income off of the properties in the next 15 up to 30 years. There's nothing that's going to tell you how to deal with the next 20 years because we're ahead of the curve. We were the first in the field, so we're blazing the market. But I am convinced the Supreme Court's going to say that a government body cannot treat a for-profit partner like we mean nothing. Make us try to continue another 20 years without an income.
So there's no mortgage on it, right?
There's no mortgage, and it barely covers its expenses without paying for any improvements.
Was there a mortgage on it at one point?
Yeah.
Was that taken out during the last 30 years?
Yes, we paid it off because we determined that reinvesting what we could help the property from so it didn't go under.
Who's we?
Heartland.
And did the village have any input in the mortgage?
You probably don't even know who we are. So for 30 years, we've just taken care of this. But no, I mean, you had some say in when we structured it at the beginning, because you don't create affordable housing without all kinds of layers of funds, because there's a huge gap between what you can get for a loan and what you have to build it at.
Someone told, and my understanding was Wisconsin Power and Light and Alliant built them.
That's who owned our stock to begin with, but investors are out in 15 years. And we've never figured out in the program how this continues to survive another 15, another 30 years. It's a great idea. It just doesn't work.
Why was it set up like that in the first place?
Originally, it was set up for 15 years for big money to come in and help a community out, and then exit with their money, but with a smaller return than they would have done. But they decided that communities weren't going to be ready in 15 years to take over, so they made it become 30 years. So we're at the very beginning. This property is one at the very beginning of what 30 years might be. But you have this whole issue of the economics do not work. Affordable housing doesn't make a huge profit.
Paul, can you print another agenda for Mr. Hummel?
He's welcome to mine. It wasn't me usually in this.
Thank you.
I get the contrast, but they were so broadly built so that you could figure out how to keep affordable housing in your community. And we've just done such a good job that you don't even know we're here.
I think we all know you're here. I don't know where that comment's kind of coming from, and I guess I don't know.
Because we've never, I guess because we've never communicated on issues. We just dealt with it.
Is anybody comfortable bringing a motion? I'm not at this point.
I'm not either.
To me, it seems like there's too many things up in the air and to question that we don't have a lot of solid answers to, that I'm not willing to put my name on it until we explore it a little bit more.
All right, so moving on. Chapter 8, discuss and review Public Works, possible motion to approve changes to Chapter 8, administrative changes and updates to outdated rule. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for listening.
You bet.
You think about this.
So, I was just sharing with Nick an email that I received from Mr. Hummel that talks about, and I believe I forwarded on to you guys, that talks about the roads over at the lake. So then when I was looking through at Chapter 8, the suggested administrative changes, I'm not sure if we're ready to look at this either until we have a better idea of what's happening with the roads over at the lake.
8-4.
8-7D. Yes, page 8-4, yes.
Oh, sorry, that's,
I know,
I should have been clear. Page 8-4. Yes. Yeah, I've got that marked too.
So so the gist of the message from Mr. Hummel was that there hasn't been an update on communication. I don't think that maybe it's going to be in our best interest moving ahead on this until we have that clarified, where we're going as far as our responsibility with the roads over at NEPCO.
Well, and it says in certain circumstances with new development, so it leaves it vague, but I don't know. Yes, I don't know if vague is good or bad in this situation.
Well, and that's exactly the concern that we've come back. I think this might be the second or third month where, like, can we narrow in that vague? Mr. Hummel, do you have anything to contribute on this?
I just, the lack of understanding about what direction has been taking place in terms of inquiry about the legal ramifications and how this could get done. It's been over 60 days since there's been any update, and we had a meeting scheduled, at least penciled in on May 30th. It got, I guess, canceled. And so I was just asking, could we get an update on this? Yeah. And then I read this in here, and now I'm getting suspicious, or at least concerned, that there's an effort here to parcel out these particular roads as not being the purview of the village going forward. And that would be news to me, because there have been no updates and no discussion about that.
And that's kind of was my thought also, concluding from reading your email and when I was reviewing this for the meeting. So then when we go back to our agenda, how do you guys feel? Do you want to take action today, or do we want a motion, or not yet?
I guess I kind of want to know the context of why.
Why what?
Why these changes were suggested.
Well, so
Unless I'm just missing some, I could be.
Was
missing
that in there last time when we talked about this? That specific change?
I think that's a newer one, but
Okay.
the
That's what I
why, I had brought it, when we were working on the ordinances and the chapters, we did chapter 8, but didn't touch the assessment part. So I said to Boz, we still have it in there, the assessment, although we marketed the wheel tax, like, don't panic, we're gonna have the wheel tax, and then it's gonna eliminate the
Special
assessments.
assessment.
So this is what his response to that, and then we had it, and it had in there as deemed necessary or something like that, and we've asked, can we get more clarification on that? But then when I see that in there about the HOA, that kind of was a moment of like, wait, and the timing of,
Well, and part of me is that because he, whoever wishes that would have been in on the front end before this whole thing with Saratoga. So like, if that's for future development and people would know going into it, the developer were going into it, I'm fine with future, but I'm with Eric, that can't be something that just gets thrown on now at the end. So, you know what I mean? And how do we even begin to hold that developer or people responsible? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not right to do that on the back end.
And that's up to you. I mean, do you want? Do you want to put for me on this?
Sure.
Yeah. Because when I there's a few different like there's red lining and there's blue lining and there's dark red lining, and I think the red the red that doesn't have underlining is from me suggesting to Boz, I believe, in most cases. It's confusing because there's a couple of, but these red with the underline are that's the only place where there's red that's underlined. So the legally speaking, regarding the HOA over there, the most recent document that I saw, the latest document from the HOA, the agreement that I believe is recorded with the Register of Deeds, but I don't recall specifically. I'm trying to think back. Is that the homeowners association is responsible for the roads, and so but it's within the village as well. So I think what this appears to be intended to do is to allow the village. Now, there are some places where it says could, such as in section A, and then this new section D says shall, which seems to limit it to what's only in section D in terms of those are the things that they can use, that the board can use to make its considerations. It's somewhat limiting, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Boz about these. So that would be something I'd be concerned about. But I think otherwise, this appears to be designed to give the village specific authority to do improvements in the homeowners association area and to make special assessments for doing so. But right now, my understanding of the homeowners association responsibilities is that the private roads there are home or HOA responsibility.
so
Can I comment on that?
go ahead.
So let's be clear, the HOAs, the two directors of the HOA are the two developers and only the two developers. And as I was told, the HOA, the parcel owners own the HOAs, the developers control it. So the developers have verbally said they're willing to give roads to Port Edwards. HOAs, we have no say in that other than our interest, which is 90% saying we'd like to have that happen. And so when we talk about the HOAs, it's assuming that it's all the property owners are part of that, and they're part of it in terms of having to pay whatever the developers say is an assessment. Okay, never seen the books, told we're not never gonna do that, don't know where the money goes. So I'm all in favor of having it being a possibility. That last sentence is pretty nefarious to me. In these circumstances, a special assessment from 0 to 100% can be levied by the village if approved by the village board. And so it won't be the developers paying that. It would be the homeowners. And now I'm back to remember that those homeowners are going to be paying significant taxes. Now already 19 cents on the dollar we don't use because we have our own water. We don't use the sanitation thing. So you add this piece to it, now we're talking about 30 cents on the dollar that we're not paying for, and we're going to get taxed to a special assessment plus pay significant taxes. Does that sound like incomparable services to the board? I asked that question.
In terms of legally how this works, I mean, the village has some things to figure out with respect to how it relates to this when they take over, because it's pretty clear that the circumstances are not precisely as they were anticipated at the time this was done. I mean, this seems like a recurring thing to a certain extent, but and again, I think some of you know this, but full disclosure is that my former firm, when prior to when I was associated with them, was involved in doing the work for the
Developers.
not for the developers, but for the village with respect to the
Annexation.
the annexation and the relationship with Saratoga and so forth. So and I wasn't involved in that, but then I took over. So I have the documentation and I've been trying to catch up on it because there's a lot. And, but I think ultimately what's also made this kind of complicated is that the village has had 3 or 4 different administrators throughout the period during which this has been negotiated, from when it first began to now. And there's already limited continuity because boards turn over. And so this is something that needs to be legally, that there are legal responsibilities. It's just what are kind of the downstream from that. So what Mr. Hummel's saying is, well, I'm not going to necessarily endorse, because it's not my job, I don't necessarily disagree with him, but regarding whether it's fair or not. But it's probably true that to the extent to which the legal responsibilities are set out might disproportionately have a negative impact on people in the HOA area.
So just my last comment is, all I was asking for, can we have an update? It appears to me that work has been done on this, and in the last 60 days, this is all news to me. And so the first time seeing it here in an ordinance says a lot of work has been done, but no report. And I don't think you all have gotten any report on that. So it seems to me it'd be great to have the board here, kind of what's going on, and provide any guidance they want to have. It's just what I was asking.
I think we can ask Boz if he'll include in his administrator's report for next week, but I don't know that it's going to be a guarantee. I'm not sure exactly when he's coming back from his vacation.
June 12th.
Right, and our meeting is what, June 12th? So I'm not sure if he's gonna.
13th.
Oh, is it? Okay.
12th is a Monday.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm over here shaking my head like, yeah, that sounds right.
I don't want to throw him under the bus and be like, here's 24 hours to do it. But
I don't know if that's going to be reasonable, but definitely we can put in the minutes that you're requesting an update and see if we can't get that going. Otherwise, thank you very much. You're welcome. Is there, I'm sorry, not comfortable with the motion. Or, what were you guys?
I'm gonna guess that his logic was supposed to be they're a certain grade of road because they were private. And then the question was if it goes to village, it would be a different grade that we would maybe have to bring up to village standards or grandfather them in with an ordinance.
There is some variability there that I don't know that we know the answers to. Unless you know something.
No, off the top of my head.
You don't have an engineering degree?
It's talked to my wife, I guess. But, I guess what I will say is that it's not unusual for there to be differences there and for those standards to be more or less grandfathered in. But
I thought I heard someplace there's some question about like certain funding revenues that it could compromise. So
that's a possibility. And that's more of a, again, that's something that an administrator or an engineer, it might not be a bad idea to get a professional engineer's opinion on that if that's something that's being considered.
okay, so no action today on chapter 8. And then on to number 8 on the agenda, discuss and review chapter 1, general government, possible motion to approve changes, administrative changes, and updates to accountability of the board and other elected officials. And yep. So there is one, so when we're looking at chapter 1 in general, if you go to 102 paren 5, we will, I don't agree with that, the village attorney being under the administrator.
No.
I think they should still continue to stay under the board so that.
I was thinking about that too.
So that's one part of it, but also when Boz put that on there, he didn't provide any other explanation as far as what, because on the agenda it says, administrative changes and updates to accountability of the board and other elected officials. So the accountability of the board.
Is that then 1.04?
And what he has in red ink there already is changed on our ordinance on the website.
Can you say that again?
1.04 for the declaration of policy and the ethical standards, which that's a state expectation, but so that's nothing new what he put in there. So
so you're just saying that should be in red? It's not a change.
Well, I'm saying he didn't, if he was suggesting there be more, he didn't provide it.
Okay, thank you.
So does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or when I looked around at other ordinances, and jump in if you have a thought on this, but what we have for ethical standards is pretty standard.
It's fairly standard language. I mean, I don't know that it needs to be changed. I don't know if there's necessarily a harm in changing it the way it is, but it's not strictly necessary. The state standards. Certainly.
Are we just talking about the addition of the words in red? Is that was his?
I don't know, because when I compare it to the website, the short answer is I don't know.
Okay.
The words in red are what I'm talking about, just to be clear.
Yeah.
The black is what's in black more or less. I mean, I think instead of village officers, employees with the parentheses, it says it might say village officers or it might say, I don't recall what it said previously precisely, but you can look anywhere and it covers, everyone directly affiliated with the municipality is covered by this under state law. So
I sent a couple emails and left voicemails and to prepare for this and didn't get any communication back. So I don't know.
If I may, there are a couple of legal issues I have with a couple of other things that I was hoping were going to be changed, but I saw they weren't, but since I knew it was coming, I didn't. I guess I noticed that the plan appears to be for the clerk treasurer to be appointed by the village administrator. I'm not sure that that's something that is, that's historically a change from the village's
Okay.
procedure, but not necessarily, I mean, it's not necessarily illegal, but it just kind of surprised me because it's never been that way. But there are a couple of things. So I'm not going to say too much about, given where everyone's at, about the village attorney and administrator. For me, it's awfully hard to advise a municipality if I can't go into the board in closed session without the administrator say so. So, I mean, for example, and I can't work under those conditions. And nor can any attorney ethically, I think. So it's probably just not something that is on an administrator's radar as much. I don't think it's intended to be malicious. But I noticed that police chief and fire chief are listed as at will or contract in the case of police, and at will under the fire chief. Under Wisconsin law, the police chief and the fire chief are covered by excuse me, 62.13.3, and it says the board appoints chiefs who, quote, hold their offices during good behavior subject to suspension or removal by the board for cause, end quote. That's not at will. That means you can't just yank them out for no reason.
Okay.
So that has to.
Was his attempt maybe to redefine what indefinite means, or is indefinite the better word?
Well, indefinite is accurate for sure, but at will is not. I think it's hard to define. Like the village doesn't know how long its police and fire chief will serve because there's really no that code section really prevents you from just randomly firing a police chief, for example. I mean, again, I just use it by way of example because I don't think anybody has any problem with Scott Drew, and I can't imagine they ever would.
If I could interject one tiny thing for Jen and Caleb, our police chief is on contract. Okay. So I think he probably has 2 years left.
Sure, but you can't modify the statutory language. Is the issue. So the contract will cover that period, but the statutory language is what it is. So you can't just up and fire a chief. And then I also noticed that there's some language about the plan commission, a couple of pages in, and I don't know. Let's see if I can find the specific. It modifies, it says the focus, it's on, it's 1.05 sub 2 sub B. It's in the middle of page 1-4. And it says the focus of this commission will be on village strategic planning, zoning issues, development issues, adjustments to the village. I mean, yeah, kind of, but I mean, the plan commission has the powers and duties prescribed in 61.35 and 62.23. with stats, not to be redundant because it says it in front of you, but it's not necessary to, I mean, any additional language, if it's not more expansive, is limiting by definition. So it should be what is covered by the statute. And again, this I guess I would point out for future reference in looking at some of these legal changes, because that's really what they are. Changes to the ordinance are legal changes that the administrator is suggesting. Many of them appear to be designed to like kind of make things easier or make things more easy for somebody looking at the ordinance to understand what they're looking at, which makes sense. It's understandable, but there may be some unintended consequences thereof. So I'm just trying to make sure that there's no. I think these are good faith recommendations, but I think that there's just a couple of places, and then I think there's something somewhere about the emergency management that the
1.06.
Yeah, that sounds right.
1.5.
Page 1.5.
Page 1.5, yeah.
And so and this is due to the overarching responsibilities of the emergency management director. As required, this designation will be delegated to the village administrator based on the event. I know that like, I think maybe some better language to just say, if the EMD cannot act, someone has to be able to do it. Historically, it's been the president in the village. But if the administrator can be more nimble and the village is, and the, you know, the board and the committee and the board are okay with that, there isn't necessarily any reason why that can't be the case. But, you know, obviously for the past number of years, in a number of places, the buck has stopped with the president on these things. It hasn't come up that I recall. But.
Anything else?
What do other municipalities generally do for that?
I mean, it's, you know, mayor, president, as the case may be. But sometimes, I mean, not everybody has an administrator either, right? So there, for example, I mean, I'll use Nakusa as an example at the risk of annoying people because I know that that's, you know, I'm not saying we should do things not like Nakusa necessarily or vice versa, but in Nakusa, there's no administrator per se. There's the clerk, there's the treasurer, there's the director of public works, and there's the police chief. And those are kind of like the, you know, and there's a fire chief, of course, and there used to be an ambulance chief, but I'm not going to get into that. But so the director of public works does a lot of the things that Boz does as administrator. And the police chief does some of the enforcement actions that might otherwise be done by the administrator. And Nakusa is bigger. So you don't need an administrator per se, but if you have one, that's a logical center point for authority to take place, provided you have communication, accountability, and trust as far as that goes.
With that, if we would go back to the village president, then would like the village president be able to delegate? Be like, okay, can you handle this? Because I'm out of town, or I don't feel like I can, or like, especially if it's
the vice president.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, like, if it's a big fire situation, I would feel more inclined to probably make the fire chief the emergency management director for that case.
Well,
does that make sense?
That's part of emergency management is handling kind of those sorts of things. I mean, you might, if you're away, you might have to make some calls and that kind of thing. But you know, I always recommend put things in writing as far as that goes. But yeah, there's a certain amount of delegation that's probably necessary because, I mean, if it is fire related, regardless of who's in charge, somebody's got to go take care of it physically.
So whoever's in charge
going to be
would have that discretionary flexibility.
Right. And again, an emergency, it's an emergency, so there's the rules are a little bit more flexible. Yeah.
This is semantics, but why is it changing from designation can to designation will?
Oh, that's because that's like, it's not semantics at all. And I appreciate that you pointed it out, because can doesn't mean anything. It means that it can, but it doesn't give any circumstances under which it could, right? That's like, there's a lot of things that can happen, but there are all sorts of factors that influence whether they will. So, but even as required is to me is not really sufficiently. I mean, look, we're talking about emergency management. How often is this kind of thing going to happen? But I would like to see language that says, under certain circumstances, like there's a general certain circumstances, basically something along the lines of when the emergency management director for the county cannot act for whatever reason, if there's, is not able to handle something, then it does become the responsibility. It will, meaning that it happens automatically. It must happen. Sure. Like that's the difference between like can and shall. Can is an option. So if you have a situation where the EMD is unable to act and it says can, well, then how does the village emergency director, whether it's the administrator or the president, know whether this is whether they should or not? It's easier to say, okay, if they can't act as an emergency, then
you will be doing.
So I totally agree with that, but does anyone else feel like that doesn't come out in the language, like where it's saying if the person from the county can't do it? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I don't feel like that's written in there.
Yeah, I agree.
What you suggest?
Well, what you just said, because I was like, well,
that was long.
I think my question was
recording, right?
confusion. So to me, the way this reads is if there's an emergency, then the administrator's taking over. That's the way it reads to me right now versus what you said, because all it says is due to the overarching responsibilities of the county emergency manager. Well, that's due to the overarching responsibilities. It's not saying,
Like,
it's not saying
I
he
get it.
can't do it.
I
Do you know what
can't.
I mean? Like,
I get you.
that's like,
In the case of overarching responsibilities, in those cases,
Like, let's say it's a
Well, I think
county-wide thing, obviously, they're gonna be really busy with the entire county. If it's more Port Edwards, it's gonna be more,
right.
they're gonna be more apt to come to us.
Nick has to go at 5 and there is something else. We need his input. Do you guys have anything else in chapter 1? Because it regardless doesn't look like we're ready for action.
okay.
So I just want that reworded, I guess. I don't think overarching responsibilities.
Naturally, I'd be the one who pointed it out. Is it just editorial to get masculine language removed to neutral language? Throughout there, it's just he and he or general. And I'm like, is that just editorial?
Yeah.
I
That's
think
all,
that's-
that's all legacy stuff that can be changed with no.
Because I think
no-
last
no
time there were
negative
some things,
Right.
That's all
I
right.
think Boz just sort of took it all and changed it once without a motion, so.
Yeah.
I wrote, I circled them so I could, for terms, back to the first page, terms. Would unspecified be an equivalent for indefinite? I was just looking up synonyms. For terms, for the word indefinite. Unspecified.
Could be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that.
It's tit for tat.
Well, if it is splitting hairs,
I
that's
feel like
fine,
what-
but I wanted to make sure
I
that,
think indefinite is probably the most accurate.
Cause and specified to me means that we can interpret that until it's specified. Right, like we can make it more specified. That's my interpretation of it.
So we're not gonna move forward on chapter 1
That's generally how
today.
people interpret it.
Then number 9, discuss and review chapter 5, fire
Oh, we're moving
department,
right along.
section 5.13 regarding language on athletic association with a possible motion to approve the recommended changes.
there weren't anything on this one.
Nick has it.
Okay,
I guess I wanted to,
Or he's gonna wants to talk to us about
I,
it.
I know this is something that I want you to start reading the discussion, because I don't want to tell you what to do, but I think your concerns need to be
Okay, so
on the table.
5.13. In regards to the athletic association, those 3 points are really kind of no longer relevant since Boz has been trying to lead us in making that more clear separation. So where it says members of a department may organize an activities organization and elect officers, provide that social activities are not funded from the village unless approved by the village board. That just doesn't even, and I wonder if we can be a little more clear, like, because they're not an activities organization anymore. That's like that's where they originated. Like if they wanted to play softball with other areas. So I think that part is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't describe them as they are. So then, and I think that we need to put in there an accurate description. They're a nonprofit public charity that they fundraise and somehow frame it that they fundraise and they're not automatically donating their money. They're not funding the budget. They decide what they want to do.
And we're not paying them for those activities. Correct.
Right. And then the third.
May I ask you a question just as a point of information from legal? So you're using they, which
They, them.
with respect, I think we're talking about specifically the existing, what is it called?
Athletic association.
This doesn't necessarily have to apply to, well, so if the athletic association doesn't, I mean, there could be a different activities organization, right? I mean, if they, like you say, like the softball thing, get together and just play softball or whatever.
So are you saying more generic, more?
I guess what I'm what I'm wondering, I mean, I think it's difficult to change this without having the other language set.
What
And,
other
and
language?
the language from the bylaws and all this, but I think it should, I agree that it's much, that increasing the extent of the separation by identifying that the village is not going to, it's not required to fund anything, that there, I mean, I guess you skipped over the number 2 with the auditing. But as far as number 3 goes, what were you gonna say about number 3? I'm sorry.
I meant number 2, sorry.
Oh, so the village auditor, I mean, of course, that's been a point of contention. So
Right.
there won't be, so I guess one question I would have about that is, to the extent that the village has control over this, I mean, a separate 501c3 organization, for example, it's more separated, but there still could theoretically be scenarios where there would be an organization that might be covered by the village because it isn't separate. I mean, they could form an organization that's and start it over again. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that to specify that maybe this does not apply to separate organizations that are for the benefit of in this case the fire department.
Well, and it's under the chapter 5 is the fire department.
Right, exactly. So, but again, we're talking about, if you're talking about a separate 501c3 that benefits for the benefit of the fire department that they happen to be members of, I think if we eliminate this language, I mean, is the point to say that they should not have an organization? They should, that it has to be separate? And then there just won't be any of these.
Now you really got me confused because
I was kind of thinking, I'm just kind of thinking this through from a legal standpoint.
So I think the village needs to know what it is. I think the village needs to know that when because part of the problem where we've been under the pressure is because we're fundraising for this. And they keep saying they're private, they're this and that. And there are some people that are under the understanding that they are supplementing our budget, which does not happen.
Yeah.
So, and they're not comfortable being forthcoming on what they do for the village. So we have the chapter 5.13 to address, like, giving us the opportunity to just put in there where the community will have an understanding and make sure that it's emphasized the separation. They can donate to the village, but then we'll also work on establishing a donation policy, and then that way we'll be able to offer transparency from the board's aspect for anything that we know of.
So is it okay if I interject? So the way I'm seeing this is you're saying an activities organization is different from the athletic association. We're talking about apples and oranges, right?
I mean, originally probably not, but
at this point,
I mean, this seems to anticipate an activities organization that's very much integrated
in the fire department. So my question is for the athletic association, because I think that's what you're trying to address as the athletic association, right? Not activities. It's the fire department that they're also a softball team, whatever, right? We're talking about something totally different.
Which they don't even do that anymore, right?
Right. So, okay, that's fine. Like, we're not talking about as activities. I think what you're trying to get policy on or clarity on is the athletic association. My question to that is, when we met about this, I believe when you were last year, it was nope, the board should not be auditing the athletic association, kind of the end, right? So with that in mind, should we have policy on the athletic association at all? That's my question. I get what you're saying, because we want to be transparent to the community out there. Like, yeah, we're not auditing them. They're separate. They're,
right.
50.
And that's a good point. And the only reason why I'm suggesting it is because it is there. Here. So what do we?
So I think it's simplistic to say, okay, part of me is like, they don't have an activities organization. Are they ever going to again? Is that something that we just completely get rid of because it doesn't exist?
Do they need to be authorized in order to form an activities.
I think it's
Organization
just because
future.
if the fire department's fundraising, right?
Right.
That's kind of where this came from. So I guess we can leave it and that's still an activities organization. We just need to make it real clear to everyone that that's completely different than an athletic association. But again, I go back to this previous question of, can we even have board policy on the athletic association, which is a separate entity?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the board policy on how it deals with nonprofits then applies to the athletic association. So
Perfect.
if the board is in a circumstance where, I mean, again, as you mentioned, if there's a policy on accepting donations, then that would cover any donations to the fire department. Then the fire department, presumably has to have a policy on how they accept, how and whether and to what extent they accept money from an outside association, which the athletic association is being represented to be, and the board has authority over that. So that's how.
Got it.
So what I mean, I guess I think it's confusing for people because I think a lot of people probably, like, legally speaking, it's a thorny area, right? So, and I think it causes a lot of people to look at it and say, wait, this is a village thing. Why would they be separate? Why do they need to be separate? But then on the other hand, if they're going off and raising funds in their own, why does the village need to get involved in it if they're just doing it outside of that sort of thing, or outside of work or whatever it is. So I think you might reasonably ask, is there any point to doing it outside of village authority, except to not have to be transparent? It's a reasonable question. But my recommendation from a legal standpoint is that the village control everything it can control from its side. Mm-hmm. By which I mean, the village should have a policy for how it deals with all nonprofits. It should have a policy for how it deals with nonprofits that have village employees or officers. Employees. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. But where village employees, perhaps, or officers are in control of it, and have where they have some authority, where they're officers of both, for example, or something like that. Like, say if you're an officer in the fire department, or a lieutenant or the chief or whatever, but also an officer on a board that directly impacts it, maybe that might have an impact. But also, the village also wants to not be caught up in liability of not to make any suggestions about the fire department specifically. But like any wrongdoing in any nonprofit. And so with most nonprofits, it's not really an issue because they're off in their own place. They do their own thing, and the only interaction they have with the village is through an occasional event and some exchange of money here and there, a donation or either received or given, as the case may be. But the fire department does a lot of stuff, where the fire department does all its stuff on village property, and a fire department affiliated organization, and more specifically, a Village of Port Edwards Fire Department associated, or basically populated 501c3 nonprofit, might be either accidentally or on purpose using village property or creating liability issues for the village while being separate. If it's going to be separate, it's got to be separate, and there can't be athletic association stuff that would not be acceptable under village purview occurring under the village purview without the oversight. You just can't have it both ways, is what I'm saying. So I think what the village needs to do is make 5.13 and the bylaws and its donation policy and nonprofit policy all compatible with one another, and say either the fire department is going to do everything and it's going to, and this would go for anything. If there was a police association or whatever, probably not enough cops to do it in Port Edwards, but nevertheless, it's either got to be it's got to be subject to audit and complete transparency with the village, or it's got to be completely separate. And you can't have some or like from both. Otherwise, what the village gets is liability without control, which is the very worst that it gets.
So it's after 5, so for the point of this conversation on number 9, are you guys comfortable with us requesting of Nick that he work to develop something for 5.13 to bring forward next month?
Yeah.
June's a
So,
tough month for me for baseball and softball wise, but I should be able to manage it.
well, just let us know if you can.
I should
We
be able to
understand.
manage it.
All right, and then,
Can I just clarify, so 5.13 as an activities organization or separating out something for athletic association?
the 5.13 in its entirety. Okay. All right, where are we?
Do you need my input on?
Well, it's the next one is well, it's not the next one, but we can move it to the next one. Number 11, discuss and possible motion to approve language regarding the donations to the village.
Did Boz share the sample donation policies that I provided for him?
You provided them to me,
Oh, I did.
and I
Yes.
shared them with everyone, and everyone has them here. So the one, whichever the second one that you sent was the one that I thought was a little more appropriately explanatory.
That was,
Monroe was the one that had kind of more paperwork. Yeah, Jefferson was the one where a department had just had to write a letter saying, here's this donation or whatnot, or for $5,000.
So for the whole purpose of offering, for one thing, every donation is not necessary, and I'm not saying this, I'm saying when we're looking at the policy, generally speaking, every donation is not what you want. Do you want a bunch of used clothes? Do you want a piece of equipment that is gonna be a liability? So in that aspect, I think it's appropriate to bring it to the board and with a motion, do we receive this donation? And that's what Tom Bartlett alluded to, that's the way it used to be. I think that's, and that helps us to create that layer
It's
of
ultimately what the school
transparency.
does too, with their donations.
So
Not quite. That's not quite what the school does.
Is this
So I have a question. So like we have this
it's like the same thing.
flag donation fund, you know, that we get it in the newsletter. Like, would that be, hey, I'm gonna come in and donate 5 flags, right? Like, would I then have to fill this out? I think it's more of a monetary donation anyway for the flags, but I'm just like wondering, like, at what level? Is it a $5 donation or is it up to
I
like?
think they get a receipt probably, and
Do
then
they?
it's in the newsletter who did that.
And the board can decide in advance too, how it's gonna handle like campaigns like that. Like, so over the summer, we did the flag or whatever. Or people can, whenever, you can authorize that and have it be ongoing and then just, you know, from time to time, if somebody wants to know if the board wants to know how many flags were donated and who brought them or whatever.
Well, I'm
like
just.
because those are something that you know what it's gonna be and it's kind of consistent. Whereas, I mean, I'm thinking more along the lines of like donations of the weed equipment and stuff.
Right, and that's what I'm wondering, do we need to specify, like, if it's over a certain amount of dollars cost, or not cost, but like.
Wasn't it $5,000 in both? Right?
I don't know.
This one, Jefferson for
says-
sure was
I
donations
see it
over
there.
5,000.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, do we need
I
to,
thought both of them had 5,
Was it?
which I
Do
like.
you need to? I mean, there's no,
I'm
I mean,
asking the
this,
legal.
this is from Monroe, Washington, so like it's kind of a guide and they have a similar like kind of code of ethics to Wisconsin, it's a little bit different.
I don't see
So
that
easy
number
to change,
anywhere.
But like, it's really up to the village to a certain extent. I mean, $5,000, I think should be the maximum minimum,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Right,
Well,
and that's what I'm
I was
wondering.
thinking way
5,000.
lower for the
Oh,
point of the transparency. This is what this partnership is bringing to the village.
Can I just say, okay, going back to school board. So I'm a counselor, right? They call and they're like, hey, we're gonna donate hygiene products. Awesome, drop them off. I let Lisa Miller, our business director, know I took these in. She goes to the board and said, so-and-so donated this.
Yeah.
The board's not approving that. So if we're looking for transparency,
Well,
if
maybe
it's under $5,000, I say, let's just not approve it. Let's let the department head say, yeah, I want that, or no, I don't. But if we get to that monetary threshold, then let's approve it. But can't we just add that in on the board meetings that it's a line item, it says
in the committee of
donations,
report.
these people
Or
donated
would it be
this.
or so you're saying in the committees approve it?
No,
Or have
well,
it-
five, whatever, whoever approves it
Just
at
an
$5,000,
update,
I'm
like,
good
hey,
with,
have you
but
gotten any
otherwise it's
donations?
So what I
exactly
think the dollar
under
amount,
5.
like, so, but that's like a no cost thing. There, a lot of the donations that would come from the fire department would be things that we would have potential liability, we would need to insure. They would need to be kept up to code, so there would be the ongoing responsibility that the village would bear.
And you think there could be something under $5,000 that would have a lot of upkeep?
Potential, I mean,
If somebody donates masks, for example, and
Sure.
they're defective, that could theoretically create a liability situation. I mean, just by way of example.
How would we know if they're defective?
There's one good way and it's not a good way.
Well, do you know what I'm saying? So
But that
like,
means somebody's probably suing and
Right.
and who's getting sued? Maybe the village, but who's paying God forbid, a wrongful death claim or something like that.
so my question would, if it comes to the board and someone says we're donating these masks, would we just, do you know what I'm saying? Like, are we gonna know enough to deny that?
Well, I'm just saying, if you know, then the board can ask questions.
right,
Okay,
And can say, okay, well, do we know, are they in good shape? Like, oh yeah, they're in unopened packaging and they got it from the manufacturer.
or equipment that we might even take in from another fire department.
Yeah, exactly. And you can say it's been inspected.
Yeah.
And then that kind of, I think legally gives you as much coverage as you, I mean, look, the village has some sovereign immunity. So there's the extent to which you can be sued for things is limited already, but the less you have to have me dealing with stuff, the less the village spends on me dealing with stuff, I guess.
I guess, so
That's
what
a
would
really
your
good-
suggestion be? Monetary, anything less than $5,000, we're not gonna approve it, or do you know what I mean?
Or I was
We
thinking
would potentially approve something, but, and this may be a non-issue, because what do we have in the last few years? Maybe they're saving for something big. Maybe, I mean, we don't know, but I think we need to have some dollar amount that, and maybe, but on one hand, you go dollar amount, but on another hand, it's depending on what it is, would be like, has it been inspected? You know, what is our insurance liability? How do we need to insure it?
I would assume anything under $5,000, we wouldn't have to insure. That's my very broad assumption. Going off of they've donated the UTV, so that came back to the village, which costs us money in upkeep, licensing, inspecting, insuring, fixing when broken. So I think this needs to come from more of that kind of like, okay, do we want to take on that additional, like, not only do we want to take on a donation, but more on the upkeep of said donation? Or do we want it to be, okay, athletic association, thank you for thinking of us, but you can keep that and you can maintain it. That kind of, those are the things that I automatically go back to. Obviously I don't think flags are gonna be I'm just trying to figure out how do we want to go forward with this? Do we say bigger equipment to kind of just cover it?
Or just equipment in general, because like you said, masks isn't, I mean, that's not bigger.
I can propose a few different possibilities.
Okay.
If those are part of the packet, then you can approve any that you feel is necessary. I really do have to.
Okay,
sorry.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Nick.
Hopefully this helps.
Yes, thank you. All right.
Good luck tonight.
Now we need to go back up to number 10, discuss and review chapter 2, village board, specifically referring to the recorded meetings. Possibly a motion to approve the language changes. So in there, obviously, we need to change the letter U to YOU.
Thank you. That was on my screen.
oh, you young people and your
And you guys see anything else on there? Or actually, I'll make the motion for this.
was that the only thing?
I don't, but we can discuss it. We'll get the motion going. Anybody second that?
And it's just this language right here, correct? There was nothing else in the packet. And
Correct.
it's just words right on there.
Yes. So I have a motion. Anybody second?
I'll second.
All right, anybody else, any questions? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I was trying to read it.
You want us to wait?
No, I was just trying to find it in all of my papers, that's all.
So I'm under number 11, Nick's gonna work on that. So Nick is gonna work on number 11 and number 9.
Okay. And then we have to figure out 8 and 1, more specifics, correct?
Well, I think we moved on from it, and with the aspect, we don't have the information and we marked stuff out, so we'll.
Bring it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then we are down to. Nick's gonna work on the donation policy, and we didn't take a vote on Ripple Creek. Anybody have any old business? None. Any new business? Oh, we could put in there for new business, update on NEPCO roads.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, Betsy. And I'll add into new business the stuff that we need to take back for work. And for correspondence, you guys had Mr. Hummel's email that I sent you, right?
When did you send it?
Last night, maybe?
I don't think so. Did you see it?
I have to remember.
I checked my email this morning and
Let me just.
unless I missed it. I don't think I had it.
Let me just.
Oh, from yesterday. Is the one I have is the meeting information. Today's NEPCO Lake District meeting.
Okay.
Information.
On.
Yeah, I don't think I had one that's from Eric directly.
Let's see. I will forward that on to you guys, but I'm gonna pull it up right now when I
Yeah, I hooked it.
find it. Do you remember what day that was you sent that to me?
I'm looking right now.
Oh, here it is.
Yesterday
Okay, and,
at 4:34.
all right,
No, sorry, that's the wrong one.
4:50.
4:50, yeah, sorry. Sunday, you said.
Jen, Caleb,
At 4:50.
maybe it was Betsy and Boz I sent it to.
Yeah, well, we don't have it.
Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna read this to you guys real quick, if you don't mind, so we can include it in our minutes. Writing to me in the capacity as chairperson of the Port Edwards Village Planning, Legislative, Property and Information Technology Committee. About 2 months has gone by without an update from Port Edwards on how the matter of the NEPCO Lake roads on the east side of the lake will be addressed once the area is returned to the Port Edwards jurisdiction January 1st, 2024. I appreciate the matter how the roads will be managed as several aspects to resolve. However, an update on progress would be appreciated. The last information shared was in an April 10th transition meeting and a brief discussion at the April 22nd board strategy meeting. A May Nepco Lake transition meeting was penciled in but did not take place. It seems like a long time has passed for, quote, discussing this with our attorney and internal to present a way ahead, unquote, without some concrete results or options. My fear is that the questions being asked are mostly around what are the problems and what is the cost of taking over the roads versus how are we going to transfer the roads to Port Edwards in the spirit of providing similar, incomparable village services to all of our residents. I see the Nepco Lake Roads matter is not on the April 6th pit meeting agenda, which I believe he meant June 6th.
Yes, sorry.
Could the Nepco roads be mentioned under old business agenda item with the request that the village administrator provide an update with the next full board meeting that includes options on addressing the matter? So, and you guys have the email and you can read the last paragraph, but we kind of accomplished that today. We'll ask Boz, we'll bring it forward on our minutes, and I think we're going to be good there unless you guys have something else. Any future agenda items? No. Next meeting is July 5th, 5 o'clock. We stand adjourned.
Are we doing 5 or?
Oh, you guys want to, we're going down to 4 since school's out, right?
We can, yeah.
All right.
Yep.